The property was worth less than a used refrigerator, at least. That's what the paperwork said. When Della Hartwell sat inside the attorney's office on a grey November afternoon, she listened as the final pieces of her marriage were divided and assigned values. The house went to her husband, the retirement account went to her husband, the savings, investments, and nearly everything accumulated over 16 years went to her husband. The only thing nobody wanted was an abandoned mountain cabin. The attorney flipped through a stack of papers and tapped a line near the bottom. "There's also a parcel in Pendry County," he said. 11 acres and an old structure. Dela nodded. The cabin had belonged to her father. "County assessment puts the land at $310, the attorney continued. "The cabin itself is listed as having no market value." No market value, the words hung in the room. The attorney moved on quickly, but Della couldn't stop thinking about them. A lifetime of memories, a place her father had loved, a place she had spent summers as a child, worth nothing. She signed the final document. Just like that, 16 years disappeared behind a signature outside. She stood beside her old pickup truck and stared at the cardboard box holding the remains of her former life. A few photographs, a watch that no longer worked, a mixing bowl that had belonged to her mother. That was it. At 41 years old, everything she owned could fit inside a single box. For several minutes she sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. She had nowhere to go, no apartment, no job, no plan. Then her eyes drifted toward the folded deed resting on the passenger seat. The mountain cabin, the one thing nobody had bothered fighting over. Maybe because everyone assumed it was worthless, maybe because nobody understood what it really meant. Without giving herself time to reconsider, Della started the truck and headed west. The drive lasted most of the day. Bussy roads became quiet highways. Highways became narrow county roads. Eventually, even those disappeared into twisting mountain paths surrounded by endless forest. As the elevation increased, memories returned. She remembered being 8 years old and sitting beside her father inside an old fire tower. He had been a forest warden for nearly 4 decades. While other parents taught baseball or fishing, Asa Hartwell taught observation. He taught patience. He taught awareness. "Most people wait until the fire is obvious," he would say. "By then, it's already dangerous." Young Della never fully understood. She thought he was talking about trees. Years later, she realized he had been talking about life. The sun was sinking behind distant ridges when the cabin finally appeared. Time had not been kind to it. The porch leaned slightly. Part of the roof was rusted. One window had been patched with plywood. Moss climbed the outer walls. To a stranger, it looked abandoned. To Della, it looked lonely. She parked in the clearing and stepped out into the cold mountain air. The silence surprised her. No traffic, no city sounds, no televisions, nothing except wind moving through pine trees. For the first time in months, her thoughts became quiet. The front door opened with a long groan. Inside, dust coated nearly everything. The wood stove still stood in the center of the room. Books remained on the shelves. Her father's coat still hung near the doorway. When Della touched it, she froze. It still smelled faintly like him. Smoke pine, mountain air. For a moment, she was 10 years old again. And for the first time since the divorce, tears threatened to surface, but she pushed them back. Instead, she walked through the cabin evaluating damage. The practical side of her immediately began calculating costs. Repairs, property taxes, Klukum selling. That was the plan. Stay one night, list the property, move on, Sybil. At least that's what she told herself. As darkness settled over the mountain, she lit a fire in the old stove. Warmth slowly spread through the cabin. Later, she found a dusty kerosene lamp on a shelf. Without thinking much about it, she cleaned the glass, lit the wick, and placed the lamp beside the front window. Golden light spilled into the darkness outside. The cabin immediately felt different, less abandoned, less forgotten, almost alive. Della sat alone drinking coffee while wind rattled the trees. For the first time in years, nobody knew where she was. Nobody expected anything from her. Nobody was waiting for a phone call. It should have felt frightening. Instead, it felt peaceful. Eventually, she climbed into the loft and fell asleep beneath old blankets. Somewhere during the night, snow began falling lightly across the mountain. Then, just before sunrise, a sound woke her. Footsteps. Outside, slow, deliberate, not animal footsteps. Human footsteps. Dealer sat upright. The cabin was supposed to be abandoned, so who was standing outside her door? Suspenseful, quiet tone. Dealer sat upright in bed. The footsteps continued outside, slow, deliberate, crunching softly through the frozen grass. For a moment, she wondered if she was still dreaming, but then she heard them again. Closer this time. Someone was definitely outside the cabin. Nervous whisper. Her heart began to race. The cabin was supposed to be abandoned. No neighbors, no visitors, no reason for anyone to be there. Carefully, she climbed down from the loft and grabbed the iron poker beside the stove. The footsteps stopped. Silence, a long, uncomfortable silence. Then, a strange sound. Wood being stacked, not thrown, not dropped, stacked neatly. Della frowned slowly. She moved toward the window and looked outside. A young man stood near the porch, thin, quiet, no older than 20. A worn backpack hung from one shoulder, and beside him sat a neat pile of freshly split firewood. But what surprised Dealer most wasn't the wood, it was the expression on his face. Confused tone. He looked shocked, almost disappointed, as though he expected the cabin to be empty. Dealer opened the door. The young man immediately stepped backward. "Who are you?" she asked. He glanced at the firewood. "I brought wood." "Why?" The boy shrugged. "Because somebody always needs wood up here." His answer made absolutely no sense. Yet somehow he sounded completely sincere. His name was Wade. And during the next hour, Della discovered something strange. Wade knew everything about the cabin. He knew where the clean spring water came from. He knew which part of the roof leaked during storms. He knew which trail remained safe after heavy snow. Most importantly, he knew her father. The moment Della mentioned Asa Hartwell, the young man's expression changed. Soft, emotional tone. Respect filled his eyes. "Your father helped me," Wade said quietly. Della waited for him to continue, but he didn't. The silence stretched between them. Finally, she asked, "How?" Wade stared toward the forest. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he answered, "He gave me a place to stay." Just one sentence, yet somehow it carried years of history. That night, Della couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was Wade? Why had her father never mentioned him? And why did the cabin feel less like a home and more like a place built for strangers? Over the next few days, she started noticing things she had missed before. 3 coffee mugs, not 1, 3. Extra blankets folded carefully in a corner, a second mattress upstairs, several hooks near the door, positioned at different heights. The details were small, but together they told a story. Curious tone. A story Della didn't yet understand. One evening, after finishing dinner, she lit the kerosene lamp again and placed it in the front window. The same place she had placed it every night since arriving. Wade noticed immediately. His eyes locked onto the warm yellow glow. "You put it there." Dealer looked at him. "The lamp?" Wade nodded. "Your father always did." "Why?" For a long moment, Wade didn't answer. Then he spoke so quietly she almost didn't hear him. Emotional whisper, "Because people get lost." Dealer felt a chill run through her body. Not lost in the forest, lost in life. Lost the way she had been lost after the divorce. Lost the way Wade must have been lost when he first arrived. The cabin fell silent. Only the crackling fire remained. Then Wade spoke again. "My first night here." His voice trembled slightly. It was raining. He stared at the lamp. "I saw that light through the trees." Voice breaking slightly. "I didn't know who lived here. I didn't know if anyone would answer." Della remained silent. Wade swallowed hard, then he smiled faintly. The door opened. 4 simple words, but something inside Della shifted. For the first time since arriving on the mountain, she felt as though she was seeing her father clearly, not as a forest ranger, not as a parent, but as a man who had quietly changed lives, a man who had left a light burning for people who needed it most. That night, Deela lay awake for hours. Questions filled her mind. Questions about Wade, questions about her father, questions about the cabin. And early the next morning, while repairing part of the floor near the old stove, she noticed something strange. One of the wooden planks moved, just slightly, as though it had been lifted before. Della knelt beside it. Her pulse quickened slowly. She slid her fingers into the narrow gap, and what she discovered beneath that floor would change everything she thought she knew about her father. Slow, suspenseful tone, hidden beneath the cabin, wasn't money, it wasn't treasure. It was something far more powerful, something her father had spent decades protecting, and once Della uncovered it, the secret of the mountain would finally come to light. Slow, suspenseful tone. The floorboard lifted with a dry wooden creak. Della's hands trembled. For a moment she simply stared into the darkness beneath the cabin floor. Cold air drifted upward. The hidden space looked old, very old, as if it had been waiting years for someone to find it. Carefully, she reached inside. Her fingers touched leather, then metal, then paper. One by one, she pulled the items into the light. 3 worn journals, a small metal box, and an old coffee tin sealed with tape. Curious emotional tone. Della, Wade whispered. What is all this? Della didn't answer because she didn't know, not yet. Slowly she opened the first journal. The handwriting was immediately familiar. Her father's. Every page was filled with names, dates, stories, lives. The first entry described a tired miner who had climbed the mountain after losing everything. The next described a frightened mother searching for safety. Another told of a teenage boy with nowhere left to go. Again and again the stories repeated, different people, different struggles, different years, yet every entry ended the same way. Soft emotional tone. The lamp stays lit. Della turned another page, then another, then another. Hours passed. The journals revealed something she had never known. Her father hadn't simply lived alone on the mountain. He had quietly helped people, hundreds of them. People who were hurting, people who were lost, people who needed someone to listen. And somehow, he had done it without expecting anything in return. Tears filled Della's eyes. The man she thought she knew had lived an entirely different life, a life of quiet kindness, a life hidden from the world. Then she opened the coffee tin. Inside were dozens of letters. Some were written on notebook paper, some on scraps of cardboard, some on old receipts. Every letter came from someone her father had helped. Emotional narration. One woman wrote that she had arrived on the mountain during the darkest night of her life. She admitted she had almost given up. Then she saw the lamp, a small yellow light shining through the darkness, and she decided to knock. Another letter came from a father who couldn't feed his family, another from a young man who simply wrote, "Thank you for opening the door." Nothing else, just that Della wiped tears from her cheeks. For the first time since her divorce, she cried openly. Not because she was sad, because she was proud. Proud of the father she never truly understood. Then something caught her eye. Near the back of the final journal, a familiar name, her own. Deela froze. Her breathing stopped. Slowly she opened the page. The entry had been written only a year before Asa died, and as she read the words, her heart broke. Voice becoming emotional. Della called today. She said everything was fine, but she sounded tired. I think she's carrying more than she tells people. I wish she'd come home. The words blurred through tears. Then came the final line, the line that shattered her completely. Voice breaking slightly. The lamp stays lit for everyone, but it stays lit for my daughter too, just in case she ever needs to find her way back. Silence filled the cabin. Della closed the journal against her chest and cried, not for the marriage, not for the money she had lost, but for the father who had quietly waited for her return. Even after she stopped visiting, even after years passed, He had never stopped leaving the light on. Emotional pause. Several days later, news spread through the nearby town. Asa Hartwell's daughter had returned. One by one, people began arriving at the cabin: an old miner, a retired deputy, a nurse, a teacher. Each carried a story. Each had once been helped by Asa, and every story sounded the same. He listened. He helped. He never judged. He left the lamp burning. Della finally understood. The cabin wasn't her inheritance. The kindness was. But not everyone arriving on the mountain came with gratitude. One afternoon, a silver pickup truck rolled into the clearing. Expensive, new, out of place. A sharply dressed businessman stepped out. His smile looked practiced. His eyes looked cold. "My name is Royce Vander." He extended his hand. Della didn't take it. Royce glanced around the property, the cabin, the forest, the mountains. Then he smiled. "I'd like to buy this place." Della shook her head. "It's not for sale." Royce's smile faded. "I think you're making a mistake." He named a number, a large number, more money than Della had seen in years. Still, she refused. That's when the threats started: lawyers, property inspections, legal disputes, court battles, every word carefully chosen, every sentence designed to frighten her. After he left, Dela stood alone on the porch. Fear settled into her stomach. Royce had money, power, influence. She had none of those things. But what Royce didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Asa Hartwell had planned for this moment years ago, long before Royce ever appeared. Long before Della inherited the cabin, a final secret remained hidden, a secret buried not beneath the cabin floor, but inside the county courthouse itself. And once it was discovered, the mountain would belong exactly where Asa intended: forever, final, ending, warm, emotional tone. Some people leave behind money, some leave behind property, some leave behind possessions. But Asa Hartwell left behind something far more valuable: a light, a door that stayed open, and a reminder that a single act of kindness can change a life forever. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what someone leaves for you, it's the person they inspire you to become. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story. Until next time, take care and keep the light on for someone who might need it.